And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. It's wonderful to be broadcasting out of Georgetown, Guyana. Um, it's a little bit rainy, as those of us who are in Guyana know, but even the rain cannot stop the play. Wherever you are, whether you are in Berbice, in Demerara, in the Essequibo, on the hinterland, wherever you are in Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. It's quite a unique experience. Those of you out in the Eastern Caribbean, welcome. I know, of course, lots of you in North America, in Europe, and I know some people are joining us from Africa. Welcome to Politics 101. On today's edition, we are going to be dealing with the issue of the environment. And often when we hear about the environment, we tend to get scared because we think it's a big scientific thing. But as we all know, that even in normal times, the environment, we never called it that, but the environment has always been critical to human existence and our own existence in Guyana, of our parents who came here across the Middle Passage and worked on the slave plantation for 200 to 300 years. And even after then, our other brothers and sisters came here to work on that plantation, and that plantation itself was an environmental hazard, but one that our people work to own a space here in that is part of our capitalization. But with the advent of all, it also causes challenges in atmosphere. We have all kind about women, and some people question it. But as we and the potentials of it becomes important. And so when we link the discovery of oil, the environmental challenges, and the politics, because at the end of the day, we have to make crucial decisions. Are we going to go with wealth, or are we going to go with environment? Or are we going to balance the two? These are critical questions in our time, and these questions have to be addressed. If those who are the policymakers do not want to address them, it is incumbent upon us in the space that is left, what they call civil society, but I prefer to call the space of freedom, the people's space, where we ought to be discussing these very issues. And I am one of those who say that nothing is too heavy for our people to handle. I think, yes, we have not gone to university and do the big degrees, but our life experience, I think, prepare us to deal with these issues. I was remarking to friends that over the weekend, Professor Thomas was on this program, and we were dealing with the gas to shore pipeline, and we opened for questions. And we got so many intelligent questions. These were from ordinary citizens, most of them women, that it gives one hope that our people are developing with the times, that we are no longer letting gender stand in our way of understanding science and understanding economics and understanding mathematics. So tonight we are going to talk about oil, the environment, and politics. We are doing so against the background that we are part of a Caribbean that is perhaps the most environmentally challenged region in the world. Tourism is a heavy money earner, revenue earner for our region. But think about what tourism does to our beaches. Think about all those cruise ships and those hotels and the emptying of the filth in the Caribbean Sea. Think about what all of that means for our livelihood, for our health. We're in the midst of COVID and we can talk about nothing outside of COVID, this pandemic. And I have someone tonight who I think is best placed to deal with this subject. Because we are talking about, as you notice, something that is broad. We're not just talking about the environment, we're talking about the environment, and we're talking about oil, wealth, we're talking about tourism, and we're talking about the politics and economics that go with it. We are blessed in the Caribbean that we have produced men and women who have gone onto the world stage and who have made their mark. And they've made their mark as Renaissance men and women and women who are broad. My students often ask me, Dr. Hines, why someone who's a Black scientist is so versed in sports? Or someone who's a sociologist knows music and calypso and reggae. So what? And I have to explain to them that if you find yourself in bondage, then you have to develop broad and myriad ways of escaping from bondage into freedom. You can't have one straight line of action. Dr. Vince Adams is one of those persons that we've produced from Guyana. One of the gifts that we've given to the world, I say Renaissance man and Renaissance woman. I first knew as a youngster, Dr. Vince Adams is a cricketer. It's like every little boy growing up. You heard about Winston English and Lloyd Cornelius and talk about the lesson in his time. Vince Adams was my introduction, and then later on, when he came back to Guyana, one understands that he left our shores, contributed to America and the rest of the world, and has come back home to serve. Dr. Vince Adams, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, and thanks for the. I may have to hire you as my agent, but thanks let me say hi to all of your wonderful listeners, and hopefully we can have a really good conversation here, because this here is it's a topic of the times. December 20th, 2019 was the day that changed Guyana forever. It's the day that we started producing oil. Whether we believe it or not, and I think it's incumbent upon every single Guyanese citizen, and I say citizen in a broad sense, in the country and out of the country, should be paying attention to what's going on here, because this oil will already started changing our lives and everything that affects our lives, our health. It's going to determine how much food we eat. What type of house we're going to be living in, the streets that we drive on, and more importantly, what our health is going to be, because that's the most important thing. Of course, it's definitely changed the politics. We all know that, and it seems to be everybody just wants this power to own this oil, to have all this money where they can spend. And on top of that, Dr. Hines, I don't think that it has even hit our politicians as to how powerful Guyana has become in terms of how the world sees us. And the one thing that I think that frustrates me and many others is that I don't think we understand the leverage that we have internationally now, especially when we see, when I look and we see how Exxon seems to be pushing us around. On top of that, our daily lives, and many of you who live around the Georgetown areas especially, you can see that we're having a tough time keeping up with the infrastructure, keeping up with with the development, everybody wants to have their industries and live. Everything wants to be located around Georgetown. Georgetown was not designed for that type of thing. So, you know, we have that they also brought us the opportunity to of making Guyana the richest country on the planet. I've always said this publicly, even before oil. You know, we have, because I don't think agriculture is our ultimate future. It's not agriculture. I don't think it's oil and gas. It's really agriculture. Especially you know, when the United Nations, for example, see that by the year 2050 we're going to have to double world food production, and they're looking at, because of climate change and everything else, a lot of the rest of the world are not going to be able to produce food. They're looking at our region to produce that type of food. So we are well positioned to become the richest country on the planet, because when you look at the rich countries such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Dubai, what do you think they all have in common? It's all sand and oil. We have, you know, we're fortunate. We're in a land of many waters, the most precious substance on earth. We don't have any major disasters. We get our floods here, but it's not a major disaster such as an earthquake or a hurricane and those type of things. We have minerals. We have the good weather where we can grow crops all year round. But unfortunately, this all can in you know, one option is bring us wealth, but unfortunately, if it's not managed properly, it can be our fool's gold. And we may even become, you know, we've seen what oil is not, doesn't automatically make you rich. Look at the experiences that we see in our sister states in Africa, for example. Look right in our neighborhood. Look at Venezuela. Look at Trinidad. Venezuela has the largest oil reserve in the whole world. Look at those two countries. You would have thought that we would have, you know, everybody fighting from Venezuela, Trinidad, hustling to come to Guyana to eke out the living. So we're at the crossroad. But it's in our hands. And that's why I'm saying the most important thing that can happen here is that every single person pay attention and get involved, because it's in your hands. And I say in your hands because we as citizens of Guyana need to hold the politicians accountable for their actions. We need to get out of this politics of race and vote for who is going to be providing for you and the making the country, or bringing the country to satisfying its highest potential. You know, we behave, you know, we behave as if, and we still have this colonial mentality, which is a major problem, where the Exxons come in and we allow them to really do whatever they want to do. Exxon will only do what we want them to do. They did not come to Guyana for oil because they love the people of Guyana. They come there to make money. And we have the faster we understand it, the better. And on top of that, they did not come there to do us a favor. When I hear the head of Exxon saying, well, if we do not, when they were violating the laws of the land, he said, well, if they're not allowed to continue that, they're going to take their business someplace else. Well, I would have said, hell, take your business. You call their bluff. They cannot survive. Trust me. Believe me. Exxon cannot survive without Guyana. As a matter of fact, that is why they're putting all their resources in Guyana. Not only Exxon, their partners, Hess, just sold out their properties in Norway to concentrate in Guyana. Exxon sold out, give up all their properties in Ghana, offshore properties, to concentrate in Guyana. They cannot survive without Guyana. Guyana right now has over 20%, with only the 10 billion discovery, and there is supposed to be more. Over 20% of all of Exxon's reserves is in Guyana, so they cannot do without Guyana. We ought to understand that, the power of our negotiations and leveraging. And the other frustrating thing is, you know, when I work for the U.S. government, when companies such as the Exxons, the biggest corporations in the world, when the United States government says jump, they say how high. It's the reverse in Guyana. They tell us how high that they want us to jump. I want to get into before I get into the environmental part too, I think I want to touch on this whole contract thing in terms of the renegotiation, because it's now raising its head again, which is a good thing. Because I think that's where a lot of our wealth, where we're getting ripped off, to be honest. And I was the first one that came out public, by the way. I remember in 2018.
Yes, yeah.
So, and I think I came out public.
Go right ahead and deal with the contract.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. So I came out publicly. I was the first one that came out publicly in the front page of a Sunday newspapers in Guyana and said that we should renegotiate the contract and take $1 billion in signature bonus, which Exxon would have willingly, cough up the whatever we wanted.
Some problem with
you hear me?
The connection with Dr. Adams there. It's telling us that the internet connection is a little bit unstable there. But Dr. Adams was about to talk about the contract, and there have been a lot of talk about the contract, the fact that according to some people, our negotiators did not see that as the root of the problem. There are others, such as Professor Thomas, who have argued that a contract is what you sign at a particular time, and that contracts can be renewed. That is normal at all times, and so therefore that people are making too much of a big issue of the contract. Dr. Adams, where do you stand on that?
Well, to be honest, with all due respect to Dr. Thomas, that's a major fallacy.
Okay, go right ahead.
First of all, the type of contract that we signed, which is this production sharing contract, and my first recommendation was to just shred that contract, because we have no capacity whatsoever to manage a production sharing contract. We should have gone with a straight concession type contract, where all you need to do is know to count the number of barrels to make sure your meter is working correctly. And you take right off the top, maybe 25% or 30%, whatever it is. But with a production sharing contract, you've got this cost style, and we only get our profit after cost. But we do not have the expertise to monitor or to verify what is cost style. And what Exxon and those companies can do, they can go hire all of their subsidiaries, and they can. I'm not saying that that's what they do, but it's easy for them to inflate the cost, and then the next thing you know, we have nobody to verify those costs. Whereas if you go with a straight concession contract, that's what it is. And let me tell you why I said it's not true. This whole thing about, well, when you sign a contract is sacred. Clauses 31.2 and 32.1 in the contract, and anybody can go read it, because I think the contract is public. Clauses 31.2 and 32.1 says that the contract could be changed or modified if both parties agree. Here's what bothers me, is that the government of Guyana, I'm talking about both parties, has never approached Exxon to say we would like to renegotiate this contract. So don't tell me that this contract cannot be modified. As a matter of fact, when I was at EPA, I changed the contract, because in that same contract, it says that the government has to give Exxon 7 days to visit the site. And I said, absolutely not. They brought that contract clause, and I said, I don't care about any contract clause. We will have unfettered access to that site at any time. The other thing that I changed, insurance. They say, well, the contract say, well, they're allowed to have their self-insurance. Well, it's not Exxon company, by the way. It's EEPGL, which is a limited liability corporation. Exxon is just a shareholder in there along with it. So they have no assets. This is a new brand company that had no assets. So you know, what kind of liability are they going to be able to cover if they have no assets? They hadn't even started producing oil. So anyway, I was able to go get the unlimited liability coverage. That you had to go get insurance first. Insurance covered them for $2.5 billion, and I said you've got to take the rest back to the parent company. Anything over and above $2.5 billion has to be covered by Exxon and the Chinese company Senocor. You can't pronounce the name properly, but Anhes, it has to go back to the parent company, which gave us unlimited liability coverage. So don't tell me that you cannot change the contract. That's absolute nonsense. I want to know, we should challenge the government, both sides of the government, as to why they cannot approach Exxon and say, I want this contract renegotiated. And I dare Exxon to say, no, they're not going to renegotiate that contract. It's in those clauses.
Right. And you're quite right. And let me clarify that Professor Thomas was saying exactly what you're saying. It's not the initial signing, but as you go along, you renew the contract. Whereas some people are saying the initial contract, once you sign a bad initial contract, then you're trapped with that. And you were saying no. And Professor Thomas is saying the same thing, that as you go along, you change the contract. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I misunderstood. I apologize to my good friend, Dr. Thomas. I misunderstood.
But you did raise an important question, because I've not heard others talk about that. That is making sure that Guyana gets what comes to it before the oil is sold. I want you to expand on that, rather than afterwards, rather than the profit sharing. I want you to expand on that.
Yes. Okay. So here's how the contract works. Off the top, Guyana gets 2%. And by the way, this is not political, because all this hullabaloo. Remember that it's almost the same identical contract that was signed in 1999.
Exactly.
By the PPP government. So when you hear all this stuff, so it was 1% royalty off the top. So, and it's paid in barrels, by the way. It's not paid in dollars.
Right.
So let's say for every 100 barrels of oil, every 100 barrels of oil that is produced, the government of Guyana gets two barrels off the top, and then Exxon now has 75 barrels that they can say, here, it cost us this month 75 barrels in that 100, or 75% of that of the revenues to run. That also includes, by the way, all their investment, which is another story. I know why we should be paying Exxon for their investment. If you come in with your business, I'm sure many business people out there, when you go invest your money, it's your risk. But nevertheless, that's a different conversation. However, so you get paid 2 barrels up front. And then now they've got 75 barrels, they can charge you a cost up to 75 barrels. So there's a 23 barrels. So you split, that's the 50% that you get. So you end up getting like 14-15% total. Okay. Now where you really get kind of gypped is on that 75 barrels, because that's what we have no way of verifying those costs. That is the problem. But here's the other kicker for that. If Exxon comes to us and say, guess what, this month it's costing me 90 barrels. It's still split the 75, but that 15 barrels is carried over into the next month. And if you carry over every month, it could go to eternity. You see, it's compounding all the time. So whereas if you're just taking a concession type contract to say, all I need is, I'm going to take royalty. And I say, well, okay, guess what? I'm going to take 30 barrels as my royalty. I didn't have to go and verify nothing, as long as I can count those barrels, and I have making sure that I've got a good mechanic or the electrician to make sure that meter is working properly. That's all. I don't need a big bureaucracy and gotta go paying companies to come and verify and do audits, and we're not even auditing, by the way. So it's much simpler. I don't know. So that's my argument, and I think we need to keep pressure. And by the way, the PPPC government, and again, this is not politics, they were for renegotiation when they were in the opposition. And then now what's helping them, because Minister Patterson, who is in the coalition, he's the shadow minister for oil and gas, and just a month or so ago, he mentioned that the opposition will stand behind the current government for renegotiation of the contract. So I don't know why we cannot, here again, we are allowing Exxon to get away with this stuff. And Exxon they would never, I dare Exxon to refuse to negotiate a new contract. I dare them to do. They wouldn't do that. But we've never asked them to take up that issue.
Let me ask you a political question before you go on. Why the previous government not renegotiate, and why this present government is not negotiating? Is there a reason that they have in common, or are there different reasons from your standpoint?
I have my opinion, because,
and that's what I want, your opinion.
Yeah, what I can tell you, I can tell you this. I can tell you as much as I was one among. I don't know who else was asked to review the contract. But in 2015, I was asked to review the contract. I sent a big document. And what was discussed, my understanding, what was discussed is that they said that I am too tough on Exxon. And again, is this colonial mentality, this intimidation? Somehow, I'm going to drive Exxon away. That was what, that was my understanding, which means that we're so scared of these multinational corporations that comes in. Well, of course, they don't intimidate me because, I used to manage them where I was. And so that's where I was coming from. I said, no, I'll bet my life they ain't going any place. They cannot afford to go any place. And so that was the main reason that somehow we were afraid that Exxon is going to somehow get mad and do whatever they have to do, which was I think was not real. So that was what happened. Now, what I think has happened now with the new administration, I think is basically the same thing. And that's not the only incident I've seen where this current government is just totally covering up the law breaking of Exxon, just for them to continue to bring in the dollar. Exxon is getting away with everything possible that they could not get away with when I was there. As a matter of fact, they changed a lot of things that I'm going to get into that I had on paper. We had already agreed myself when we were negotiating the Payaro. We had come to an agreement on the government side, and by the way, including the Canadian team that this same government had hired to bring in for us to review the Payaro. We all agreed on some issues there. On flaring and water dumping and everything else. We agreed. We called in Exxon. We said, here, this is it. This is the final thing. You will do this, etc. And the next thing I knew, when I left, everything got turned on its head. And the Payaro, or else the Payaro would not have been signed the way it is today if I was still there. I guarantee you that. But so those are the kind of things that frustrates. That is very, very frustrating, and especially when you hear comments from it's bothersome when you hear comments coming from the vice president, for example, when he makes this thing so political that the permits signed by the Granger government, he has improved it so much to protect the environment. Well, that is not that he's. I would assume that it's because he's being misinformed. I don't think that he could so barefacedly say something that he know not to be true, because it's far from the truth. As a matter of fact, it's the complete opposite that has happened. They've changed the lease of permits to accommodate, to even make it clear where Exxon could go in and violate the permit in an even worse way. So those are the kinds of things that really are bothersome when you see the government is basically just going along everything that Exxon wants. Exxon is basically calling the shots, and the government is even covering up for them by telling untruths to say that they're not. The government itself is coming out and say that they're not violating the permit when it's specific. It says flaring is prohibited. How clear could you get? And then you're going to come back and say, this is coming directly from the government. Now you're going to come back and say, when they got caught flaring, as a matter of fact, they say it was even more insulting. When they were flaring, well, after United just shut them down at one time, for them to fix it, etc. So when they were producing here in this last incident that they had with the compressor failing again, when the newspaper started getting on them and asking them questions, they say, well, Guyana need the money because you guys basically they're bad. The country they're bad, they need the money, so we got a flare so that we can produce the oil, etc., which was a major insult. The government itself came out and almost said the same thing. Matter of fact, when you hear the leadership in the government even fabricating, saying, well, hey, you know what, they're allowed to flare. The government is hamstrung to stop. That was their exact words by the vice president. The government is hamstrung because guess what? And I think they were inferring that which is nonsense because I wasn't even there when Liza 1 was signed. But basically, that we signed the permit allowing them to flare up to 14 billion cubic feet, which was a blatant lie. So when they were confronted every day in the newspapers and by myself, etc., asking them to show the public where this 14 billion, they couldn't find it. And Exxon had to come out and throw them under the bus by saying, I don't know where they got that number from because I wasn't any part of it. And then they went ahead. They even went further here and even modified the permit here recently. Guess to do what? To allow Exxon to flare in any startup for 60 days. For 60 days in the US law allowed 2 days for startup. They're allowing 60 days. Could you imagine flaring at maximum capacity for 60 days? You're looking at billions of cubic feet of gas in the air, damaging because when it gets up there, it doesn't stay there, by the way. Besides breathing and everything, it forms acid rain. When it falls as acid, it gets into our vegetation and agriculture and in our fisheries. And then on top of that, you're dumping water that is being produced into the ocean. So here you are telling me that your permit that you're signing now is better than the past permit, which is an absolute, it is not true. So, and then you come up with this shiny object, which is a con job, to say that you're going to charge $30 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent flared, which is another con job and nonsense, because it's over and above the 60 days of flaring. It's not within that 60 days of flaring. It's over and above. So they've got to flare for 60 days, and it would be almost unheard of that any company is gonna flare for 60 days. So we're never gonna get any money above that 60 days because now they're gonna make sure they repair their equipment. They're gonna flare up to 60 days. And so we're not gonna get any money. But if the government is really serious, let's charge them, let's put that $30 per ton against the 14 billion cubic feet that they've already flared illegally. Let's do that. That would add up. I made some rough calculation because it's a kind of a little complicated calculation. That would add up to around $30 million US. If we're serious, let us charge them for that they've already flared illegally. But don't go and try to fix the permit now to accommodate them, to tell them we're going to allow you to flare for 60. In the meantime, by the way, Exxon and all the majors, they've committed to cutting back on their flaring throughout the rest of the world by almost 50%. But in the meantime, we are allowing them to flare. Do you know what is the justification that they use? That I had to, basically, I got irate that I almost, the meeting was almost over, the way that I was angry. Their justification was here's why we can flare, because Guyana is a carbon sink, meaning that Guyana has a pristine air environment. We're not polluted, but since we have capacity to absorb more pollutants, then they should be allowed to flare. You say, wow, Dr. Hines, but what would you say then if I tell you last week the Honorable Vice President said the exact same thing? It was published in the newspapers. He said the exact same thing, that Guyana is we've got the capacity basically to absorb more carbon dioxide, so it's okay for them to fly. So here again, Exxon is going to say whatever they want to say. I'm not upset at Exxon. They're going to say and do whatever they want. But where are we to monitor, to make sure that they, that they comply with our laws and to protect the health, safety, and the environment of our people? So, so those, and then the other part of it is the dumping of water besides the air. Now the environment, it's either air and water. Guyana is fortunate in that we've never been a highly industrialized country like the rest of the country. We're now going through that reindustrialization, if you will. But we are fortunate that we can learn from those countries. Look, when they broke down the Berlin Wall, it so happened, where I was in the United States government, I was among those who were charged working with leading international agencies to go look at all these countries, to clean up the environment in those countries. And the rivers and everything were like sewers. They had nuclear, they had hazardous waste, all because they didn't have environmental laws and regulations. There wasn't any control. We are fortunate that we can learn from that because we are now at the beginning. So if we do not get started now, remember, we're only dealing with one ship now. We've got one FPSO. This is one drill ship offshore. Exxon already said, I think by the year 2027 or whenever, they're planning to have 10 of those. And this here is one of the smaller ones in terms of production. They're looking at 110 barrels per day. When they've got 10, and this is only in the Stabroek block, what's going to happen when we have the entire ocean? And remember now, those blocks offshore adds up to like 3/4 of the size of Guyana entire land mass. So it's almost the entire land mass that they're going to be producing from. So what the heck is going to happen if we can't control what's going on here with one drill ship? Could you imagine what's going to be happening with when all of those drill ships are producing in the air, in the water, everything as the fishing? I've been getting complaints, calls from even the fishermen are even complaining it's already affecting. And guess why? I wouldn't doubt it. Because the other thing that they're being allowed to do, which I had stopped, and I said never, it's not going to be in the Payara, is that they're dumping the produced water. So when you produce oil, the oil comes up with gas. For every barrel of oil produced, by the way, when it comes to the surface, it's like a Coke. The gas is dissolved in the Coke itself. So it's only when you open the cork, it pops off. It's the same exact thing. When you bring a barrel of oil up to the surface, it's on this major pressure. But when it gets to the surface, the gas comes off. And for every barrel of oil that comes up, it produces 1,000 cubic feet of gas. You can keep that number because then you can calculate yourself how much gas they're producing. When they tell you, they don't tell you how much gas they're producing, but you can calculate that, multiply. Like now it's 120,000 barrels per day. Multiply that by 1,000 means that they should be producing around 120 million cubic feet of gas per day. So if your compressor is not working and you can't inject stuff, that means you've got to flare that quantity every single day. So you can imagine if you got a flare for 60 days, multiply that by just 120, and this is only one one production operation, by the way. So the dumping of the water. So in addition to the gas, you also produce water that is highly toxic. The gas, by the way, has all kinds of toxicity in there. You got hydrogen sulfide, you got nitrogen dioxide, which are the two that when it goes up there, it gets moist, it forms nitric acid, forms sulfuric acid. It got carbon monoxide, it got benzene, toluene, all of these toxic substances. And so that's what goes up in here. That's what you breathe. That's what cause climate change, etc. It also, when the oil comes up, it comes up with water, and that's how they separate the two. Now they separate the oil and the water at the surface, and then they're allowed to dump that water. The standard practice is you do not dump that water. You're supposed to put it back into the reservoir. they're allowed to dump that water in the ocean. That water, first of all, is hot as hell. The temperature of the seawater is about what, maybe 20 degrees centigrade. That water is like close to 60 degrees centigrade that they're dumping into the ocean. On top of that, it has mercury, it has all the heavy metals, mercury, lead, radioactivity. So they dump, and it has all, they're allowed to dump it with with it may appear to be a small quantity of oil. The standard is for every million barrels of oil that they dump, it's going also with 42 barrels of oil. For every million barrels of water, it's 42 barrels of oil. So could you imagine when they're pumping, when they're dumping, who knows, maybe by the billions, when they get everything going, dumping, you're dumping a lot over the life of the field, you're dumping hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil just into the ocean. So that was one of the things that when I was there, I said, absolutely not. You will not be dumping any water. You're going to re-inject it back into the reservoir. So guess what you see, this is the kind of dishonesty that the government has got to be careful about, and I think we all should be concerned that I don't think that they are, because the misinformation that Exxon was pushing out there was, well, the World Bank allows us to dump water in the ocean. Well, that was a blatant lie. What the World Bank said is that you should only dump water into the ocean that is properly clean if it's not feasible for you to technically put it back into the reservoir, or it's not economic. Well, it's both, because you know how much it costs them to put the equipment on the ship? $300 million. Now they're making tens of billions of dollars, but they don't believe that the people's lives, the lives of the people in Guyana is not worth $300 million. So they're gonna dump it, because our lives and our health is not worth $300 million. And all they've got to do is put that equipment there to re-inject it back into the reservoir. So those are the challenges that we have, and those are the things that the citizens of Guyana in country and abroad have got to make sure that it changes. Remember, Exxon has already agreed. Exxon's promised from day one there will be no flaring. Day one, they said from day one. When day one came on December the 20th, 2019, and equipment failed. And you know what was the first thing that Exxon came in and told us when we had the meeting, myself and Dr. Bynum and the rest of us? The first thing they do now, imagine this is Exxon, one of the, supposed to be a company that should set the example with everything. And they said that the wiring of the compressor, they wired it wrong. So just imagine you can't even, you're not even able to wire the house properly. I don't know if you put the red wire where the black is supposed to be. I mean, how could you trust a company such as that to put your life in their hand? Then they come and say, well, the seals are bad. Well, guess what, folks? This is not the only ship that Exxon has operating throughout the world. They're operating all over the world. The big question is, why is it only happening in Guyana? That's the $1 million question that I've asked.
Let me ask you, let me throw that question. Let me throw that question back to you, Dr. Adams. Why is it only happening in Guyana?
Well, I can tell you what, I have no opinion. In my opinion, I believe is they because we are not holding them accountable. Which is what I intend. If we say, Exxon, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to shut you down, and I'm going to have an investigation, and you're not going to operate until we understand what's going on, until you solve this problem. That's exactly when I was working with the U.S. government. That's the first thing we would do, is shut you down until there's an investigation and it comes up with a solution where we find out what's the root cause and there's a solution for it and you fix the problem. Money was never a reason for you to continue to operate. Any EPA should not be considering profits as a reason for operating. And that is what I believe is happening here. The government is allowing them their way to operate. And so they have no incentive really to be shut down. to be fixing this problem. Why is it only in Guyana? And they could not. I can tell you this. It could not happen in the United States. Yeah. Absolutely not. Could not happen there. So they should not bring any standard lesser than what they have to abide with in countries such as the United States. You know, it's IPAS, it's disrespect, and it's callous. They have no respect for our health, safety, and the environment. I hear there's nobody who's a bigger proponent when it comes to business than I am. I was trained that way with the U.S. government. Business was a key part, but you have to do business correctly. You just can't come and want to destroy the environment. Exxon is in a heck of a lot of lawsuits in Nigeria, in the United States, and guess what? Those lawsuits, guess what they're charged with? Fraud. And guess what's the fraud? Reporting, misinforming the government in terms of data. That's what's being alleged. Those they had to pay. I read here recently where they were fined like over 12 or 15 million dollars. But the charges say that they are under they've committed fraud by reporting information. The information that they were reporting to the government was not correct. So is this the government? Is this the government? Is this the company that you want to trust and you're defending and you're bending over backwards and giving them everything that they want and to embolden them to continue to violate the laws of the land? There's no question. You know what the government did when they say that, well, the permits that was signed in the Grenier time were less stringent than this, which is again, it's a blatant misinformation. That's not true. As a matter of fact, it's the reverse. And I would like to debate anybody who be, I don't know where the vice president is getting that information from, but he's totally misinformed. You know what was also changed with the new administration because of this flaring issue? What was happening when I was there? They came up with this, this blatant bare-faced, bold-faced, I guess con to say, well, okay, here, because what the permit says that you cannot flare. Flaring is prohibited. That's the exact language, except under the circumstance of startup, maintenance, and emergency. Well, we thought that was so obvious as to what those are that we didn't have to define it. So guess what Exxon came back and said? How bold could you be? Well, they've been producing for months, but they're saying we're still in startup. Even though they're producing oil and selling it on the market, they said they're still in startup. So I said, okay. So I was going to fix that. So I went back and I defined what startup is. And my definition of startup is that is the United States standard, which gives you 2 days. Well, after I left, this government goes and they give them 60 days, which is unheard of. So they can flare 60 days, and so if they can flare 60 billion, and then after the 60 days, they start paying this $30 per ton. Now, here's what I want. And then the vice president said, well, now they're going to pay a penalty. Well, first of all, then let's assume they go above 60 days. And then here's the other excuse that the government is making for them. Well, this here is what polluter pays principle. Now, that's also a misrepresentation of the polluter pays principle. What they're saying is that it's okay for somebody to pollute the environment as long as they pay for it. That's never the intent of the polluter pays principle. The polluter pays principle is if you go spill, for example, if there's a spill in the Gulf, then the polluter has to pay to clean up the spill. The polluter pay principle is not to pollute the environment for as much as you want and as long as you can afford it. Because what the government is saying, if this $30 a ton over 60 days is the polluter pay principle, then they're saying if Exxon could afford to pay $30 a ton for polluting the environment, they can flare how much they want above the 60 days. They can flare for the next 15 years as long as they pay. This is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's craziness. So those are the kinds of things. The other thing that that the government did is, well, you remember the startup thing. So I shut this startup thing down. So they go to the next exemption, which is maintenance. After I left now, they didn't bring up the maintenance stuff when I was gone because I'd already shut them down and said, you got to fix the problem. But anyway, so now recently they come up with the facilities on the maintenance. So I said, how could that be on the maintenance? That was never the intent. Maintenance means every 6 months they shut down the entire operations for maintenance. That's what maintenance means. And when you shut down for maintenance, you got to bleed. There's gas in the system. You got to bleed it, and the only place to bleed it is through by flaring. So they're saying now that they're on the maintenance because the equipment is not working. How ridiculous could that be? They're saying that because they're operating on the compressor that is supposed to be injecting is not working. Well, guess what? When I go back and read the PIARO, that's what the PIARO says. As a matter of fact, I copied it because it was so shocking. The PIARO, to quote exactly from it, it says, well, basically what it says, I can't find the thing now. It says that as long as that the equipment, if the equipment is on the maintenance, and they specifically said the gas handling equipment in the permit, which means that they're providing a cover now. It says in the permit specifically that if the gas handling equipment is on the maintenance, then you're allowed to flare, which means that even this $30 per ton after 60 days, it doesn't apply anymore because they're exempt because of what's now in the PIARO permit that says that they're exempt if that piece of equipment is on the maintenance. So those are the kinds of things that is totally ridiculous and disingenuous, and so people better start paying attention.
Dr. Adams, thanks very much, and the audience really appreciates the overview that you've given us, the linkages between regulation and what Exxon is allowed to get away with.
Yep.
The EPA is the regulatory body, right?
Yes.
Yes. And you have outlined what you did to ensure that you carry out your job as mandated by the laws of Guyana. And we seem to be having quite a lax in terms of regulation and the interference of politics in the regulation of the oil industry. I think for me as a political person, where the big problem is, if you have an environmental protection agency, that agency should be exempt from political direction so that you allow the technicians and those who are trained and have the expertise to do their job. It seems to me here that there is overt interference in the regulation of the industry. I am not putting you on the spot, but I am saying that I think a lot of this has to do with the entanglement of external interests in our elections. And for me, what is happening here is that a lot of payback is happening. That's my view. If you want to comment on it, Dr. Adams, you can, but I'm not forcing you.
I'm gonna. And these are facts. Again, whatever I say here tonight has nothing to do with politics. It may involve, political implication, but it has absolutely. And those of you who know me, I'm a professional. Politics don't get in the mix. Matter of fact, when I went to Guyana, I took that job. I even told the president that I'm going to take it only if I'm allowed to do it my way. And if the president or whoever else is not happy with what I'm doing, then I'll humbly leave. And the one thing I can say without question, and ask any member of my staff, the coalition government never interfered. I was allowed when I got there, and I did a lot of controversial stuff. I was in the newspapers every day. I even went after a lot of big time companies, and even I know for sure that these were members of political parties who were big contributors to parties, and I went after them, and I had the full support. The full support. The president never called me one day and say, you know what, you need to back off. Nobody ever called me. When the ministers go out there to visit their constituency and they get any complaints from them, that's the only time they will come back and say, here, you know, they will send me an email or a text, say, you know, I got this concern from this, whoever it is, which is quite appropriate for me to look into it. So they never interfere. I revamped that agency. That agency was, in the words of even the staff, they said it was dysfunctional. I mean, we did not have an agency that was functioning when I got there, to be honest. I turned that entire agency around. We did not have technical people. I went out there. I hired 20 new technical persons, including engineers and scientists. We didn't have any of those. We didn't even have a filing system. We did not even know how many permits we had. We didn't have vehicles. We had one single vehicle to cover the whole country. When I left there, we had 10 new vehicles. And guess what? I did not go back to the treasury. You know where that money came from? From back fees, where we had permits we had over 500 permits that had expired for some over 15 years. And nobody was paying attention. We had operations out there, did not have any permits. And I'm talking for some big time operations. So what we did in a single year, the staff collected over $150 million. That's what we put to purchase vehicles, to hire new staff, to set up an entire system for a registry, for good documentation control. You know, reorganize the agency. And on top of that, I worked with the World Bank, and we set up an oil and gas unit out of the EPA for 36-member oil and gas unit with highly specialized people who knows the oil and gas industry. 36. And this year, you know, of course, my plan is, because I never, you know, this was going to be my first year of a full year of budget last year, as a matter of fact, but because of COVID, etc., was to start filling those positions. And now what I heard is that that's been completely put on the back burner. Everything that I was doing apparently has been reversed. You know, we getting the political influences and the political phone calls that I had completely stopped. Now calls are coming in, and people are finding out what's going on with this person's permit, and it's the morale of the agency has. I mean, I get report. It's really in the dumps once again, and I brought it up. You know, I mean, people were excited. I had people wanted to come to the agency, and before I got there, people were leaving in droves. It was just a stop gap until they found a new job, and then suddenly we started getting everybody who wanted to come there. You know, I was even sending people abroad on details to go work, you know, with companies in the United States, in Texas, in Trinidad, to see, you know, where they're going to be exposed to the new industry, the new chemicals that are going to be coming out again. I send them there. So I rejoined all the major environmental associations throughout the world, Society of Petroleum Engineers, you know, all and was sending them to conferences. So all of that was happening, and we are going in that direction. And now the other thing is that Exxon tried to intimidate when they weren't going to pay a paltry $500 fine for some little spill. I decided to take them to court. And I know that we would have won the case because it was clear in the permit that they're not allowed to spill those. Just for 500, I mean, it was 500 US. And guess what? As soon as I left, my understanding is that the government has now withdrawn the case. So those are the kind of things that are really now destroying the morale of the staff, because they said before I got there, politicians would just call in and when they make their decision, they would overturn their decisions. All of that had stopped, and now apparently we're back to where we are. So it's either you have an EPA or you don't. And right now, look, a good example. A position was advertised for the deputy chief executive officer, which is the position that I held, the law, the act says that the executive director will, go through the processes and everything and hire the deputy. Guess what? The EPA had no input, including the executive director. Everything went to the president's office. All the applications, the screening, the interviews. The EPA had no input whatsoever in clear violation of the EPA Act. So those are the kinds of things that are going on there. So when you look at the EPA, and I remember the guy from Exxon, Rod Henson, who was the previous manager before the Rutledge guy. And Rod used to tell me every day, he said, Vince, do you realize that the EPA is the most important agency in the whole country? Because everything, you guys, everything comes through you. And you, the ones who are protecting the most important part of this country. And this is the way, they treat the EPA as, so we back to where we were. So when I hear this thing about, and this has nothing to do with me representing the government, the coalition government, because they used to get their fair criticism from me, including, the contract, etc. So when I hear this kind of, stuff
right.
that the new permits are better than what was written before, I wasn't there for Liza 1, etc. It's absolute nonsense. It's misinformation, or the vice president most likely has been misinformed, because I don't want to believe that it's just a blatant attempt to misinform the public.
Yeah. Dr. Vince Adams, former head of the Environmental Protection Agency, the agency that is charged with overseeing and regulating, among other things, the oil industry, giving us an account of his stewardship and his attempts to bring that agency in line to perform its duties. Based on his testimony here tonight and what has happened since he left the agency, we, I think, are going to be on good ground to succumb to the conclusion that there's too much of political interference in the oversight of the oil industry. My own view is that it's a conflict of interest, and a political party that is government gets its hands into an industry and regulating an industry like that has tremendous implications for other aspects of Guyanese life. Our health, resulting from the environment, and if it affects our health, it will affect other aspects of our economy, such as agriculture, fishery, and so on. So this is a very important undertaking that does not need political hands. And I think we can draw that conclusion tonight. My own view is that we need an oversight body, I think, that is made up of Guyanese who have the kind of institutional knowledge. I think someone, Dr. Vince Adams, okay, I don't want him at the EPA, but we should have an oversight body that works in addition at a kind of advisory capacity to the EPA that I think serve as a buffer in the government and the EPA. I think such a committee or whatever you call it to keep in the government of Adams. We're having some difficulty.
Yeah, you were breaking up there.
I was breaking up. No, I was. Yeah. Yes, I was saying that given what you've said here tonight, it seems to me that we need a kind of advisory body to the EPA. That includes people like yourself who know this business very well, to serve as a buffer between the hands into what the EPA is doing. So an advisory body to the EPA, I would think, would be something in the short term to keep this political interference out. What do you think?
Well, and it could be, and if I agree with you, and we need we definitely need the technical expertise to build that capacity, and like a technical and administrative advisory body. But then how it has to be, the word independent has to be in there. It cannot be a politically appointed body. And I know I don't know what would be the process for getting that, but the EPA has to be independent. That's the key word, independence. And that's the one thing I can say that I enjoyed when I was there. But it's not happening anymore. I can tell you blankly, it's not happening anymore. We've gone back to where we were before. But whatever mechanism, there is an EPA board, by the way. But of course, the EPA board is also appointed by the government. So all of these boards are appointed by the government.
By the government. There you
go. We know what happens. When everybody is appointed by the government, and the people that they appoint, obviously the people that have some political connections, etc. And this is not about one party. It happens all the time, regardless of which party is in power.
All the time, yes.
But what I can say for a fact,
yeah,
that even that being the case, even with my board, where I'm sure that there were some political connections there, but nobody interfered with what I was doing. They respected what I was doing. I was showing results, etc. And they basically, I had my way because I was showing results, and no politician ever got in my way. And that's the kind of thing that we want. That's a fact. Yeah. Nobody can dispute that was happening when I was there, and nobody can dispute that it's now completely changed after I left. Those are facts.
Right.
And that's what we want, is that independence of that agency.
Exactly. Dr. Adams, let's talk about the gas to shore pipeline.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a necessary a project? And if so, what are the upsides and the downsides of such a pipeline?
Okay. Well, first of all, and I get asked this question all the time, coming from as an engineer, we only make decisions based on study, the numbers. The president, the vice president first came out and said, when this thing came up, well, they did a study. Well, or I have not seen a study. I would like to see the study in terms of economics to begin with. And of course, economics is driven by the engineering. And of course, the engineering also has, what's the environmental impacts. Remember, you're going to have to bring this pipeline from whatever this line at the bottom of the ocean, coming from 100 miles or so, 160 miles. And you're going to lay it on the seabed. That gas pipeline will leak. Okay? It will leak. And that gas is toxic to especially some specific fish. It's very toxic. On top of that, have you done any what is called tectonic studies or seismic studies of the bottom of the ocean? Because remember, we've got volcanoes all over the place, which means that the Caribbean is not like a stable place. What happens if you got a rupture in the pipeline or something? How are we going to monitor on a daily basis that pipeline that is going to be coming for miles water deep? Are we going to be monitoring for leaks every single day? So, and then how much is that going to cost? So as opposed to re-injection of this gas. So those are the kinds of things, and when it comes onshore now, of course, there's an environmental impact in terms of processing the gas onshore. Then you got to stock, the water, it comes into a trap, the narrow mouth of the Demerara River, where 90% of commerce operates. Then you're gonna we see what happens there now. You're gonna have all kinds of shore bases. You're cutting down mangroves. So where is that study? And I cannot make I do not want to come with a conclusion until I see the numbers. On top of that, what are the alternatives? What is the objective, first of all? what are the alternatives? I would think that the main objective is for us to eventually get to total renewables. I've always been a big advocate. I think Guyana has the potential to become, you know, self-sufficient in renewables. We've got a lot of waterfalls all over the place, which could easily be tapped into. Going back into since in the Burnham time, we've been attempting to do that. We've got solar. Should we be investing that money there instead of bringing this thing? To be honest, my opinion is, which is what I tell everybody, this here is political, and because it's Region 3, and I have no problems with that. When I was working in the U.S. government, I dealt with politics. But come out and say, don't be saying that this is, it's a no-brainer in terms of economics when you cannot show the numbers. It's political as far as I'm concerned. This is my opinion, because of the shutting down of the sugar estate, because I've heard comments to the effect coming from the politicians that, well, if Georgetown can have all the development, what happened with the West Demerara people? So you don't use those type of things as your decision when you're talking about studies. But if it's a political decision, just say here, the Ifrot estate has been shut down. They're in need of jobs, etc. So that's the reasoning, and it happens all the time, even in the United States. People want to take back projects back home to their districts, etc. But don't come and say, well, you did a study, and the study dictates that this is the thing. That's not, that's misinformation. So my personal opinion is, to me, it's political, but that happens all the time. But you come out and be, and be open with the public. Apparently, when I inquired some more, there were studies that were done. Yes, but the studies were done for, I think there was supposed to be a location going up the around Mahaica-Mahaicony area where they're going to land this thing. And they looked at 10 different sites, as a matter of fact, the past administration. Right. And it so happened that Wales was one of the sites considered and rejected because of the traffic coming into the Demerara River. And, you might get ships where you got to dredge, you got to keep it open and all kinds of stuff. So unless I see those geotechnical and environmental studies and the cost of doing it and how is it going to pay back, to say, well, electricity is going to cost a penny when it used to cost 10 cents before, that's all well and good. But what are the other, when is that going to pay for itself over a period of time? And what's the cost environmentally, etc.? All of that should have been made clear to the public, but I have not seen a study. So that's my assessment outside of it's, and it's, outside of my of having the details of a study. But I believe it's political, and it's not. I'm not saying this in a critical way, because political decisions are made all the time. I've lived in it, working in the United States government. But then you still got to go back and at least show some, it makes sense economically when you're spending taxpayers' dollars.
Should the government get into the business of refining oil in Guyana?
No, the government should not. No.
Why not?
Again,
why not?
The government, first of all, I don't think the government should be getting into, we grew up in a culture in Guyana, obviously, where the government owned everything, and we ought to be, you can't be competitive that way in the world, and the world is moving towards competitiveness, which means, you invite investors, and investors come in, they know that they've got their money invested, and they're not going to come and invest if they know that they cannot produce a profit for a good product. With government is not in the business of making profit. So you can have inefficiencies all over the place, and guess who pays for that inefficiency? The taxpayers, because nobody is being held accountable for it. Whereas a company comes in and they're not competitive in terms of providing a product, a good enough product, when in a competitive market, and they're out of business. So the government should not get into those type. However, again, they've got to have controls in place in terms of regulations, etc., to make sure that it's done properly to protect the health, safety, and the environment of people. That's what the government's role is. Now, in terms of a refinery, whether refinery should come to Guyana or not, again, that would be left to the market to decide. If an investor wants to come in and say, hey, you know something, I'm going to come in and refine. This is my investment, not a government investment. This is my investment, and they want to come in. The only reason they're going to be coming in, just like how Exxon came into Guyana, you think that Exxon came into Guyana because they think that they're going to lose money? It's because they had the evidence that oil is there, and even if they invest, they went to their corporate people and say, and what the big question the corporate folks always ask, well, okay, what happens if we don't find oil? This is the money we're going to lose. So that's the risk. They look at risk. It's the same thing with an investor. An investor comes in, they put their money at risk because they know it's a good risk, and this is what they can afford. It's all like all of us investing in the stock market, etc. It's the same concept, but the government should not be into projects. The government can solicit, for example, if the government really want the refinery, for whatever reason, if they can come up with some study to say, well, hey, we think that it's time for us to get a refinery and in Guyana to create jobs, or I don't know, for whatever reason the government can come up with, then they can put it out in the market for bids, for coming and let companies bid on it. But the government should not be in the business of refinery. And I'm not sure about this refining stuff, because refineries have been shut down in the Caribbean. The one in up to recently, the one in is it the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, I think. Up to recently, they have been shut down.
Yes.
So I'm not sure. The thing is, when you do refinery, especially refineries are normally service a region, and if you're going to do refinery, you probably need to get with the other governments in the region, Brazil and Venezuela and those places, and say, well, okay, here, we're going to do a refinery, and here's the agreement we're going to sign. You're going to send us this amount of oil, etc. But you've got to have that broad agreement, because I'm not sure if a refinery would be economic in Guyana based on what we're going to be producing. And then again, Exxon is going to say it's not economic for them, because Exxon got to service their refinery, send it to their refinery up in the United States. So it's very complicated. So I don't think the government should get into that. There was talk about these small refineries, modular refineries, which I thought was a good idea, because at least they're small, the economics might be okay. But those were private investors. However, they still got to get the oil. Where are they going to get the oil? Because remember, the government is being paid in oil. So when the government gets it all now, they got to advertise in the market for people to come and take their oil. It's so often that even Exxon would normally take the oil, buy the oil from us. So it's kind of complicated, but just on the surface, without looking at all the other intricacies of it, the politics and the availability of refineries, etc., the market for that type of thing. And then on top of that, remember that everybody are moving to renewables now, and then we just had a change in government in the United States, where renewables is going to become even more on the front burner, because the United States government obviously is going to be putting pressure on countries such as Guyana to transition to renewables. So we're not going to get that type of support for building refineries and those type of stuff.
Professor Clive Thomas on Sunday threw out the idea of a national oil company. Do you support that initiative?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, you remember I told you I was one of, if not the first person that was asked to review that contract in 2015 when oil was discovered. Yes. That was one of the first things that I stated there. The first thing that I said, we should tear up the production sharing agreement and go with a concession. The second thing was to form a national oil company, without question. And of course, we're gonna have to build a capacity to establish such an oil company. But that does, the national oil companies, and we think of them not only for servicing the country itself, but we know for sure that if we have a national oil company, we would obviously, assuming that we get them, let's say after a couple, maybe 5-10 years, they've built the capacity, they've become a bona fide national oil company. That would be a major plus for the country, because now we've got a company that we can trust to operate in our oil. We don't have to worry about going and doing the kind of monitoring in terms of checking their books, etc. They work for us basically. It would be just like a government agency. But on top of that, what natural oil companies do, they're free to go and operate throughout the world. They go, if there's they can go, just like how Exxon comes into Guyana, they can go to Brazil, they can go to Africa and compete with those other oil companies, to drill in other companies. And that revenue, whatever revenue they get, would come back to our country. So yes, without question, I that's the one thing that I would propose, that the government, because the government has to own its oil. It's probably our in terms of revenue, our biggest revenue generator for the country. And right now we're depending upon and trusting a multinational corporation that basically has no interest in your health and my health or the development of Guyana. Trust me. They're now, if by doing that it helps their bottom line, that's fine. But their only interest is that bottom line. You see all those guys who come in here, the managers and them, how do you think they get their promotions, their bonuses, their raises? You know what it is? You think in their criteria it says anything about Dr. Hines, how is his health, or how is Dr. Allen or anybody else's health out there? Is that bottom line. When they set their goal, if those managers do not meet those targets, a lot of them are in trouble. They're removed, they're fired, they're held accountable. So it's everything about their bottom line, and we do not understand that. As a matter of fact, I know that because I used to be paying some of these bills for these companies. So I know it. So the sooner we know that, if we think that they're coming in and doing us a favor, we better look after our interests. So we should have our list of things and say, here, this is how it shall be done. These are the minimum requirements that you have to meet. And, whatever it costs, that's you've got to meet that. But when we just lay back, they're gonna do whatever it is at the cheapest cost possible that they can get away with. And that is what I see happening here right now. Why they don't want to install the $300 million equipment so that they can re-inject the water instead of dumping it in the ocean? Do you imagine what are they gonna leave? Here is the other thing. These are companies, when they come in here, this offshore oil production, it's only gonna last, I don't know, maybe 30 years. Do you know that half the population of Guyana, half the population is what? Less than 50 years, less than 25 years old. So if you look at 30 years from now, most of the population is, we're going to have those youths who are going to be in their prime. So what is this country going to be left with if it just polluted all over the place? What is going to happen to our agriculture? What is going to happen to our fishing? What is going to happen to the atmosphere, the air that we breathe in? Not to mention, this whole thing about climate change. I noticed some measurement here recently that the sea level off of Guyana's shoreline, it's rising faster than any other part of the world. I can't remember. I think it's 5 times the rate of any place else. And we're below sea level already. So what is this after 30 years, which is their main target? They're going to come in here, they're going to make as much money as they want to make in 30 years. Then they're gone, and they're left, so Guyana is left with whatever they leave. So that is why we've got to protect our assets right now, to make sure that when they leave, we still have a country. We still have a country.
Let me ask you this. There's some who were saying, given all the challenges that we have, it's better to leave the oil in the ground. And what's your view on that?
No, I absolutely disagree. on a couple of counts here. As a matter of fact, I know that, you know, if I ask the question all the time, that how if we take that to the extreme, how about going back to the cave age? Because
Yeah.
development, all of us are here, even living the age that we are, because of development, because of oil, as a matter of fact, even though oil interferes with the environment, but there's always that trade-off. Okay, you develop, you take risk. Are we willing not to go fly an airplane? Are we willing not to drive an automobile? You know, if yeah, so that's where everything has a risk. When you get into an automobile, guess where it's coming from? It's powered by, guess what? Gasoline, which is oil and gas. When you fly an aircraft, whatever you do, your energy in your home, your lights, electricity, your refrigerator, it's about energy. No, so all of this stuff about keeping it in the ground, I absolutely do not agree with that. As a matter of fact, I agree even with the vice president in this country when they say, well, we need to produce at a slow rate. I do not agree with that either. I think we need to produce as fast as possible. It's an economic. These things are economics. It's development, etc. But it's what we need. We need a lot of money real fast too, with where the country is economically. But is what do you do? The key is what do you do with the revenues that come in to the country? What do you do with the revenues? How do you spend it? And what regulations you have in place to protect the health, safety, and the environment? It's not about the oil production. You can do it safely and environmentally soundly. As long as you have money, we talk about the EPA. That is why the EPA is so critical. You've got to make sure that the EPA has the staff, regardless of what it costs. And what the EPA is costing, it's minuscule. It's a drop in the ocean as to what it could cost if you do not do that. So it's not about leaving the oil and ground, because that's I hear that all the time. It doesn't make any sense to me. Or else we can take that to the extreme, like I said, and go back. Now, in terms of revenue, again, it's what do you do? Where's your plan? What I've not seen, and I've been clamoring for among my political friends from day one, is where is that strategic plan for the country? Where is that integrated strategic plan? And again, I don't like going back to where I work, but we had a strategic plan. We had every year we submit our budget to Congress. That budget for that year had to be tied into a 5-year strategic plan, a 15-year strategic plan, a 20-year strategic plan. Where is that strategic plan as to where this country is going, so that you can prioritize? Here's the other thing that doesn't make any sense to me, and I got crosswise with my friend. This whole thing about a sovereign wealth fund. Now you tell me, and I try to break it down. It doesn't make any sense. Do you, Dr. Hines? I don't know if you invest in the stock market, or do you go invest in the stock market if you don't have food on your table, or you don't have a place to sleep, or but that's what's going on here. This country is in need education. Look at the schools, look at the roads, look at infrastructure, agriculture. We need that money right now. You're going to take that money and put it in the bank, and every year you take out a little bit, and then you're telling me, well, it's for this future generation and it's because of corruption. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You need to spend that money right now to develop, send everybody, give every Guyanese whatever you give, send education should be free from kindergarten right through university, infrastructure, everything. You invite people to come in, develop the country. That's where the money, don't go put it in a bank. And guess who's going to be making the money when you put it into the bank? Those foreign banks. Who's going to be managing it? And God forbid, if we get into another international crisis, economic crisis that we had in 2008, you remember that international crisis? What could happen with our money? Because it's an investment. The best investment you can make, especially when you tell me because we want a younger generation, is to do it today. Send them, let them go to school, give them whatever, make sure that they've got the benefits of going to school. Then I hear, well, Norway has one. Well, yes, Norway could afford it. Norway is the richest country in the earth when I last checked.
Yes.
It's just like
Yes.
if I've got all the money, I've got food, I've got, I've got a luxury house, I've got cars, I've got everything. Then I've got excess money. I can put it into the stock market and take that risk. Norway can afford that. Don't compare Guyana to Norway. We need to be spending that money today. So again, I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but it ties back into your question as to whether we should produce the oil or not. It's not about producing the oil because we can do it safely and environmentally soundly, as long as we've got the right infrastructure, we've got the right capacity, we've got the right regulations in place. We can do it, but it's what do we do with those revenues to make sure that when oil is gone, invest the money in renewables, for example. Make sure that when oil is
Dr.
gone.
Vincent Adams giving us some.
Yeah.
Dr. Vincent Adams giving us a mouthful tonight on Politics 101, on oil, on the environment, on politics, on regulation. Sorry, thank you very much for coming on tonight and enriching us. And the topic on which we ended, that is what to do about the money. Is the sovereign wealth fund the way to go? That is going to be the topic of the next program that we have on oil and gas. And certainly, Dr. Adams has already auditioned and he has passed and will be on that panel to deal with the question of what we do with revenue that we get from oil. My brother, thank you very much for coming on. We are both cricket fans. We were talking before we come on air. We lost badly against South Africa in the first test.
That's right.
We do better in the second test. Cricket is so important.
Yes.
If we invest in cricket academies of the high standard that Australia and India and England doing, we can produce cricketers not just with skill, but with the kind of thinking that goes with skill in the modern game. Here's hoping that we improve against South Africa in the second test. Thank you very much again, Adams, and certainly we'll be back. The audience is saying that you should be back because you've given them so much information and perspective tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Hines. Thanks to all of the listeners.
Always glad. Thank you very much. I'm always glad to bring people on the program who have the kind of expertise, native expertise, who give us, to educate us, to inform us on the issues of the day. That yes, we need some red meat. We need to rev up ourselves. But above and beyond, we need to educate ourselves because we are living in a world that is moving at a rapid pace. And as citizens, we have to be on top of all the colliding issues that come before us. And that's what we are trying to do on programs like these. As usual, I say to you, you come in peace to this program, you leave in peace. You come to this program to participate, to ground among ourselves as we try to plan for a future. It's not just a political future that's important. It's an economic and social future. At the end of the day, it's about our humanity. It's about feeding ourselves and clothing ourselves and housing ourselves. It's an old an old adage that goes back to the early days of independence. But we are at a critical moment in Ghana's history, in world history, and we have got to bring ourselves up to date tonight. I hope we have given you enough information and enough perspective that you can begin to make sense of our present, a present that has to be pregnant with our future. Thank you all so much for coming on. Thank you all so much for continuing to support this program. There are many programs online now. We work together, not against each other. This program has its own niche, and you help us to find that niche. That niche has to do putting ourselves in that frame of mind that all citizens become an expert in oil and gas, an expert on the environment, an expert on politics, an expert on economics. That is what the ultimate citizen is about. Citizenship does not only mean belonging to your country, but being able to ask the questions that need asked, answer the questions that need to be answered. Next week, we're going to be tackling this business of this national, regional thing that they're talking about, that they've set up. Is it a parallel army? Is it a parallel police force? Is it bringing the phantoms from the road and putting them into the institutions of the country? Something smells nasty about this new security they've set up. To assemble our people who are experts on these issues, and we're going to deal with that on Tuesday. So until Tuesday, when we come back again to tackle another issue, David Hines, thank you for tuning in to yet another